To demonstrate some of the debugging tools, let's take a look at a simple application that I've created to provide some sort of flow that we can use for debugging examples. To open a project using VisualStudio.net, choose File, Open, and Project from the menu. This then gives you a screen that you can use to navigate to whatever folder contains the various projects that you've saved. I've got a folder here for a project called DebugProj. If I go into that, I'll notice that there's a listing right here, DebugProj. You'll notice the icon has the little IDE symbol next to it. I'll go ahead and select that. That's my what's called the solution file, which represents the project as a whole. I'll go ahead and click on that, choose the Open button, and then that will open the debug project. Now, it may not look at first like anything has actually been opened. You still pretty much just have a blank screen in front of you. But if you go to the Solution Explorer on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there is a project that's opened up into that Solution Explorer. So I can go to the Solution Explorer and select a particular listing that I want to work with. In this case, I'm going to choose one called debug.cs, which is basically nothing more than the class file that I'm going to be using for our debug examples. Now, as we scroll over to the left-hand side, you'll notice that the class name is debug, the namespace DebugProj. Inside my application, what I've done is just some simple iteration using a loop and then printing some data every single time it goes through the loop. So I have a simple for next loop here. What we're going to be doing is just looping through a series of numbers from 0 to 9, and then for each of those values, we'll go ahead and write those back out to the console. Don't worry too much about the actual code itself right now. We'll be explaining a little bit more how the looping works later in this course. However, for right now, we just want to be comfortable with how the debug operation physically works. The first step in the debug process is usually to set a breakpoint. What I'm going to do is come to this line of code right here that calls my custom method printVal, and I'm going to click in the margin. You'll notice that puts a little reddish dot out here in the margin. That's a breakpoint. That's an instruction to stop the application from processing at that particular point so that I can step through it line by line and see what's actually going on inside the application. Now, if I were to go up to my menu and choose Debug, again, I've got two options. I've got a Start and a Start without debugging. If I choose Start without debugging, it will ignore the breakpoint and simply give me the results of the application. So you'll notice what this application is doing is just counting through all those numbers from 0 through 9. If, however, I go up to the menu, choose Debug and Start, or I could also hit the F5 key on my keyboard, it builds and starts, but you'll notice that it stops right here on this line of code. Notice the little yellow arrow out here on the margin. That indicates the current executing line of code. What that means is that this statement, this printVal statement, has not yet run. It's about to run. All I have to do is tell it to advance to that line. Now, if I hover my mouse over that statement, you'll notice it will give me a little information about what that statement is actually doing. I can also hover my mouse over a value, property value, a variable value, etc., and it will give me the context and the value for that particular variable. In this case, the variable I currently has a value of 0. So on that little pop-up window, it gives me that value. This is what we refer to as a pop-up watch. It gives us the values of whatever expressions or statements that we hover over. You'll also notice that a couple of other windows have popped up as well. Down here on the left-hand side, we have a set of windows labeled Autos, Locals, and Watch. The Autos window is simply keeping track automatically of a number of different expressions which are probably of interest to us. The Locals window gives us the ability to watch all local expressions, arguments, etc. Finally, the Watch window allows us to monitor watch expressions that we physically create. So if I'm interested in watching the value of a variable or watching the results of a particular expression, then I could add that expression here into my watch pane. Over on the right-hand side, I've got another window that's divided into pieces. One here is called the call stack. The call stack tells me basically where I'm currently executing and how I got there. If I actually had called another procedure or called into a procedure, I might see more procedures here in this call stack. My breakpoints tab gives me a list of all current breakpoints. The command window gives me an interface that I can use to actually type code, to interact with my application at this point. And finally, an output window, which just gives me general CLR output. Now, if I wanted to advance to the next line of code, there's a number of ways I can do this. One is to use what's called a step into. If we go up to the toolbar, notice a button here that's labeled Step Into. What the Step Into button will do is step into any procedure which may be called by this line of code. Now, since the line that I'm currently sitting on actually makes a call to another procedure called printval, when I click on the Step Into button, you will notice that the line of execution goes into the printval function. I can continue to advance line by line, and now that I've advanced past the line where I actually do the right line, I should be able to go to my command prompt window and see that the first statement has been executed. Let's go back to the code window and continue stepping. So if I go up to the toolbar and continue pressing this button, Step Into, it will simply advance the next executing line of code, or piece by piece, and step into and into again for every single click. Now, another button that I have here is one called Step Over. What the Step Over button does is if the line of code that I'm sitting on calls another procedure, it will simply execute that procedure essentially as one step. It doesn't step into it, it steps over it. Now, the code will still execute, but it will execute in a single step and instead of actually stepping into and going line by line. So if I click on the Step Over button, you'll notice it simply advances past that. It does not actually step into the printval statement. The other button here that's in this list is one called Step Out. Now, the Step Out button allows us to step out of a procedure that I may have called into. So if I click on the Step Into button and step into the printval procedure, and then decide that I'm not really interested in advancing line by line through this procedure, I can click the Step Out button. The Step Out button will return me to the point following the line of code that called that procedure that I just stepped out of. You'll notice this takes me to the next iteration in my little loop. Now, all three of these buttons, Step Into, Step Over, and Step Out, are also available here from the debug menu, and there are also some keyboard shortcuts that I can use as well, F11, F10, Shift F11 respectively.